Greetings, YouTube friends. Today is Thursday, February 12th, 2026. And today I'm joined by my friend KM, and we're going to discuss the upcoming annular solar eclipse on February 17th of 2026. Hey, KM, welcome.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm thinking that we should just jump right into the charts. Since I'm a financial astrologer, I've taken a look at the eclipse across multiple assets and some important prominent figures in the world. And so I think I'll just start and we can take a look at those. And then I think you're going to guide us through some astro mapping. And I'm looking forward to hearing your take on the eclipse too.
Great. Looking forward.
All right. All right. So here is the eclipse that is over New York City. And what really stood out to me is that the eclipse is conjunct with a 4-degree orb, the part of fortune. And the part of fortune is a calculated point that you can use in mundane astrology and financial astrology. I find it to be very important in financial astrology. And it's also exactly conjunct the ascendant or the horizon over New York City. And then it's, we've got this kind of stellium, if you will. We've got the moon, the sun, and which is, by definition, the new moon, which is happening with the solar eclipse. It's a north nodal eclipse. And then we've got Venus in the mix here too, all sitting on the ascendant over New York City and opposite the south node. Cam, what are you seeing in relationship to all that?
It's really interesting. We talked about on the last new moon how much the seventh house was activated for selling. And here we have the south node in the seventh house over New York. So that really stood out to me. But I also wanted to point out, have you ever seen the idea that an eclipse on the part of fortune could actually eclipse the effectiveness of it or eclipse the fortune? Or is it generally favorable?
That's a great question. And I actually think that's entirely possible. And part of the reason I think that that's entirely possible is additionally because this eclipse is square to Uranus conjunct minor planet short. And
you can't make it up.
No,
crazy.
You can't make it up. And so I did a historical analysis on the Uranus conjunct minor planet short, and I actually shared it with my Discord members. So if you are interested in the more detailed analysis, you're welcome to join my Discord. The link will be in the video description below. But to summarize it, this conjunction definitely has a correlation to periods of consolidation or potentially strong down moves in the US equity markets. And that huge down move that we saw in Bitcoin back in November was also aspected by this situation. And so, that's notable. But that square really tells me not only is it square to Uranus, which is unpredictable inherently, but to have the Uranus minor planet short conjunction is actually exactly complete within 24 hours of the eclipse. So the complete conjunction will be actually at 10 a.m. on February 16th over New York City, and it's taking place in the first house over New York City. And it's perfectly square to the sun on that day as well.
Incredible.
Yeah. So that's kind of the overall take on, I think that this is a setup for extreme volatility in the financial markets. And it's a little bit of a wild card because eclipses are known to disrupt other cycles, specifically in the financial markets. But I also see that in mundane astrology as well. So the question, of course, that I always ask myself with an eclipse is, what's being eclipsed from us? What do we not see now that we will eventually see in the coming days to months after the eclipse?
That's a great way of putting it. Maybe some part of the part of fortune is not visible, but will become more visible to us.
Absolutely. Yeah. So then we've got the minor planet short Uranus conjunction within 24 hours. So if we just kind of roll through the different assets and take a look at where this eclipse is falling on each asset. This is the inner wheel here is SPX natal chart. And then on the outer wheel here is the eclipse. And this eclipse is falling just within a couple degrees of the natal Mercury Vesta conjunction. Well, Vesta's a little wide orb. It's 7 degrees orb off Mercury. But this is falling right in between Mercury and Vesta. And then you've got Venus here very close as well, just at 3 degrees. And, the eclipse is also very close to a Venus return as well for the SPX chart. And so that is all falling on very close to the midheaven and square to the ascendant of the S&P. So it would definitely indicate to me when you get a hit on the axis like that, that this is definitely has the potential to impact how other people are going to see and perceive the stock market specifically. Do you have any
And you
thoughts
can already
about that?
see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can already see that today. I mean, it's already a headline that the Dow is 600 points down today. I use Vesta a lot in astro-mapping, and I think even though it's a wide orb here, it's an important asteroid to track for investments and the aspects of investments in a natal chart. So that's fascinating to me. One of the things I wanted to say earlier, which I think applies to this chart too, is the conventional wisdom is everyone's bracing for a drawdown. Everyone's bracing for a big short. And I think it's interesting where Uranus might change the timeline of that or surprise people with the timeline. I don't think anything's guaranteed in the next few days.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, if we just kind of zoom out and talk about the financial markets in general without necessarily pulling up the charts, the NASDAQ has been going sideways for months. The S&P is also building a sideways range. And, the transports and the Dow broke out last week, but we have to see if that's going to hold, this week, because we have seen some selling this week. But either way, I think that this could go either way. And the thing about eclipses is that they're a wild card. And so I always find eclipses to be a good time to scale back my trading actually, and really be committed to any positions that I'm taking during the eclipse season.
I like that. And that's a great way to work with Saturn, which is just entered a new sign as of this eclipse about 3 days before.
Yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow, actually, tomorrow will be the Saturn final ingress into the sign of Aries for this cycle.
Friday,
So,
February 13th.
That's right. You can't make it up. So here's the New York Stock Exchange now. This is the inner wheel here is the New York Stock Exchange, and the outer wheel is the eclipse. And so this one is particularly interesting to me. This one falls on the New York Stock Exchange natal Pluto in the 8th house. The 8th house is rules debt, taxes, leveraged instruments, institutional money, other people's money. And so we've got the eclipse falling on the Pluto then, and almost perfectly square to the New York Stock Exchange natal sun. And then with transit Uranus exactly conjunct the New York Stock Exchange natal sun.
Incredible.
This is just a recipe for volatility. That's really how I'm seeing it. The other thing that stands out to me is that the eclipse is trine to the New York Stock Exchange natal Neptune. And it's, we'll include Jupiter in that in the natal chart because the New York Stock Exchange has a natal Jupiter-Neptune conjunction with a 5-degree orb. So that's also very interesting to me that that's getting activated. And when you have, I just can't reiterate enough, I think, when we have Uranus so heavily at play here, it's very hard to make a directional forecast for the financial markets because it's not only do we have the eclipse, which is revealing something hidden specifically about fortune right now, right? But we also have Uranus exactly sitting on the New York Stock Exchange sun and square to the eclipse. So it's just like expect the unexpected, I think is what comes to my mind,
Yeah, and one great thing I learned from you is volatility doesn't mean trading opportunity. It means you could get really easily chopped up. And I love what you said earlier about sticking to your long-term goals and positions. We just entered Mercury shadow period. It's going to retrograde on the 25th. So this is a time, and we have next Friday, February 20th, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is like a massive Mercury retrograde for confusion. And I think if you have a long-term position and you see buying opportunities, great. You could buy the dip, but I'm going to be very cautious in the next week or so.
I totally agree. My personal positioning, and I talked about this actually um in the new series Astro TA Macro that I've been doing I'm focused on ag right now, wheat
Mm,
and DBA, and those are doing great right now. I've also
yeah,
been,
they are.
yeah, yeah. So it's about positioning and moving your money around to the places that maybe will be slightly less affected by the extreme volatility, but nothing is insulated. I mean, this is definitely a setup for some extreme unexpected moves. And next week also is options expiration week. So when you add that into the mix, options expiration week is almost notoriously choppy because they're burning premium, right? And so it's just intraday. I used to be an intraday trader. Now I focus on swings and longer term trades, but I used to have a rule for myself, which was zero day trading, at least from Wednesday to Friday on options of expiration week, and oftentimes the whole week. So
I
adding
know.
to
Can
the
you
story.
believe that options expiration on the Saturn Neptune conjunction? It's going to be a blockbuster week. And another thing that you taught me, which I really like, because a lot of my friends and clients who are astro curious or familiar are nervous about this setup, right? It seems so volatile, and um, you know, they're like, what do I do? Do I sell everything? And I think, obviously, I'm not a financial advisor and don't provide that, but the way I'm approaching this is look for the opportunities. Like you said, there's always an opportunity, even in difficult times, right? And I love how you mentioned that ag play because I think that's going to be really great.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I love that outlook. I think that's exactly how I approach the markets too. Um, and then I will also just mention, and obviously not able to review this in this video, but something to be aware of is where the eclipse falls on your own personal natal chart too, right? And so what is being revealed to you personally, or what is
Mm,
potentially hidden from you personally? And,
hmm
to the viewers, if you're not astro fluent, you can use a free software out there like AstroSeek or astro.com, and you can put your birth chart in there, and then you can just add in the date of the eclipse, which is February 17th, 2026 at 7:01 a.m. And that's New York Eastern Standard Time. So you could adjust that to your own time zone. And you can just check and see what part of your birth chart does it fall on. And you're welcome you could book sessions with KM or with myself to go on a deep dive, but you also can just use AI to just kind of get some clues or some hints about what that might mean for you.
Yeah, one of the ways that I find clients use AI effectively for Astro, it can get really messed up if you ask it complex questions. It's not good at researching dates. It doesn't have an ephemeris. But if you just want to plug it in and say, hey, I'm an Aries rising, where is this eclipse hitting me? Even if it's just the whole sign system, it will be able to tell you an answer like that and give you ideas of what part of life it might be affecting. Or you can tell it, I want to use the equal sign system, which Margot and I like to use as well. But it's really fascinating. For me, this eclipse is happening in the 12th house. And I told myself, I'm going to stay put all winter. I'm not traveling. There's a lot of astrology going on. And suddenly, as the eclipse is approaching, I have this urge to escape and go on some random trip with no clear destination. But I love how literal the astrology can be sometimes.
It's true. That is absolutely true. I agree with you 100% about the AI stuff. It's certainly not it's not a replacement for an astrologer, but I do find that particularly if I feed it in my thoughts, sometimes it gives me back some really interesting ideas. Um,
Yeah, it's all about the prompts you use, which is what's so interesting about it.
Absolutely. So last but not least, but I guess not quite last because I have the dollar chart too, but this is gold chart. And this one is particularly poignant because the eclipse is falling right on the natal, and this is gold fixed chart. And so if anybody's not familiar with what that is, it was the first time ever that a group of bankers and prominent families got together and fixed the price of gold. And this time is 100% accurate, which for financial astrology is very cool because not everything is going to be 100% accurate with the time. It's logged on the Rothschild website. So I use this kind of as the mother of all gold charts. And Uranus was at 28 degrees of Aquarius. And so this eclipse is falling exactly on Uranus. And, Uranus sits on the gold fixed chart in the fourth house. And so that's the house of home. And so I imagine that gold, maybe coming home, or maybe there may be some, gold and silver has had a huge run. And, I don't think it's over by any means in the longer term timeline. But in the current setup, I think after a run like that, an asset has to, it has to kind of balance itself out. It has to go through a period of consolidation before it can move again. And so, I'm taking this largely as gold looking like a period of volatility, which also aligns up with the charts that I have that I share in the Discord and sometimes on Twitter. So you can follow me on Twitter or join my Discord to check all that out.
Yeah, I like that point about the IC in the home because, you've shared these analogs in the Discord about it being range bound or at least consolidating. And I love that metaphor of coming home. That's really interesting.
It is interesting. And then the other thing is check this out. It's Uranus square natal Uranus.
Incredible.
And so, that Uranus square has not, I would say that's been, that's been going on since last year, right? As Uranus has been going back and forth over this degree, transit Uranus has, and it's been largely favorable for gold so far, right? And so that's kind of an interesting thing to also just name, is that a lot of astrologers perceive a square as negative, but a square doesn't necessarily have to be negative. A square is simply, if you think about it from an energetic standpoint and measurements that they've actually done, is that it just means that the energy doesn't flow as freely or smoothly as it does in a trine. So it's kind of like, I think it brings up that you got to work for it kind of vibe,
Yeah. And I often see Uranus squares breaking people free, breaking assets free. It's not always bad.
That's awesome. I love that. Breaking free. Okay. So we've got the dollar, and this is the origin chart, the mother chart for the US dollar as well from 1792. And also falling very close to a natal Pluto in the 8th house, similar to the New York Stock Exchange. And so that's interesting again, because those are the 8th house matters are Plutonian matters, leverage, debt, taxes, other people's money, that sort of thing. And, in Aquarius, you also have to bring in the Aquarian themes, right? Decentralization, freedom, anything pertaining to that. And so, of course, that brings up ideas like digital currency or CBDCs, or, this is a rabbit hole. We could go down at length, right? But is there anything that stands out to you about that, that idea?
AI dollar. Well, I do think it's really interesting how Uranus is in the final few weeks of Taurus, which rules currency, rules money. And this eclipse is square Uranus. So we know that we're seeing some major changes to currency, both fiat and existing cryptocurrencies. And, when Uranus first entered Taurus in 2018 was the first, I think, big public awareness of how big crypto was going to become. And now it's leaving Taurus in the next few weeks on April 25th. And it's a real challenge. And it's not that the end of crypto is here, but it's almost like Uranus on the way out is making it really have to be clear on what it wants, what it is, and how it's going to disrupt the system. And maybe fiat actually adapts to crypto. I saw Lynn Alden write this the other day on Twitter. I thought that was really a smart point, that maybe the ultimate story of Uranus and Taurus is that fiat has adapted to crypto rather than vice versa. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. That's a great idea. Well, and it also kind of brings up just the relationship here, because this eclipse and Pluto in Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, right? And so with that square as well, it's really, everything's all linked up. Let's take a look at the Bitcoin chart real quick, because I have that one loaded up as well. And let's see if I can get that too.
While you're loading that, I'll just say, You know, it's interesting. This could be another example of Uranus upending expectations. What if this is a pivot low? And I don't follow the dollar closely, but I think everyone the conventional wisdom is that the debasement trade is already here. The US dollar is going to collapse soon or debase soon. And I don't know if that's really as fast, even if there are long-term challenges. That's another way I could see Uranus upending expectations here.
Yeah, that is, interestingly, Uranus is conjunct the moon down here in Leo on the dollar chart. And
Mm,
that's going to get hit later this year when we start having the next series of eclipses. So that's something we could unpack more later. The dollar got hit with, before the most recent decline on the dollar, got hit with an eclipse opposite its natal sun. And that was when we had those Aries Libra eclipses a
yeah.
couple years ago or a year and a half ago. And I actually in my Discord I had posted when that happened that that's not generally favorable for an asset and usually
Yeah.
will lead to a decline. And it did. We saw the dollar decline for a while. So I'm in the camp that we could be putting in a local bottom on the dollar for a little while. There's, again, I don't have the price charts in front of me for the dollar, but there's a historical pattern on the dollar on the monthly chart. If you zoom out and take a look at the monthly technical analysis chart, where the dollar does tend to go sideways on the monthly chart for like 4 to 6 months before it reverses. So while it looks like a bear flag and everybody thinks it's going lower, it's actually basing and forming
Mm,
a base to go higher. So
fascinating.
very interesting thoughts on the dollar for sure.
Also,
Um,
remember that Aries eclipse, sorry to interrupt you again, but
no,
that Aries
go.
eclipse last March, March 29th, was at 9 degrees, pretty close to the sun. And when we
Mm-hmm.
had that tariff drawdown in the markets, it was stopped really because of concerns over the dollar and more complex than that. But, that was one of the big reasons that made the Trump administration back off those tariffs because there wasn't a retreat to the dollar like most equity drawdowns.
Yeah, that is absolutely. This dollar chart is powerful, and keeping track of it, I think, in the aspects that are being made here is very. It's a great tool to guide us through the financial markets. So I think I definitely want to get to your astrocartography maps, and I also have the Donald Trump and Bill Gates charts. What do you think would be best to do next? Do you want to
I'll
take
just
us on a?
quickly say that both of them have significant aspects to their charts. And one of the points I want to make about this eclipse is even though it's happening in a different part of the zodiac, Saturn Neptune conjunction next Friday, and we're going to talk more about that. Hopefully, we get to do a video on that. They're in some ways related. And I see the eclipse being the shocking moment or the catalyst for this long-term reset. We have Saturn Neptune coming together at 0 degrees Aquarius, the entire start of the whole zodiac. It
Aries.
hasn't, sorry, yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
0 degrees Aries, that hasn't happened in 6,300 years, which goes back to the invention of writing, the Bronze Age, major resets here. And the reason I'm raising all this is I think part of the reset that we're going to see with that, which is a long-term cycle, it will play out for many years, is technology and AI. And so for this eclipse to be in the sign of technology, Aquarius, 3 days before that Saturn Neptune conjunction, I think is really significant. And with the Bill Gates chart specifically, it is opposite his Jupiter Pluto conjunction, which is really interesting because that a lot of astrologers see as impacting his billionaire status, his wealth over time. In the 90s, he was the richest man in the world. That was often his title. That was how people knew of him. And obviously, we're seeing in the news with him being involved in the Epstein files that this could be just a really challenging time for him personally. But I do like to look to founders' charts for financial astrology as well. And there's something about the fact that this could be eclipsing his wealth or having a new beginning with the wealth of Microsoft since they're heavily invested in AI. And remember
Mm.
that eclipses are new beginnings and new endings. So, maybe this is a really challenging part, and rightfully so if he's involved in the Epstein part, but it could also be a big change for Microsoft, which for
Yeah.
me is one of my top AI picks in the long run.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And let me just see if I think I might have prepared the Microsoft chart real quick, but I'm not sure if I pulled it over here. Um, Here we go. I didn't pull it over there, but I've got it right here. So this is interesting. We don't always bring up price charts as we're talking about the new moon, but um, Microsoft is due for both a 20-week and a 40-week cycle low. And so that definitely has my attention, at least for a short-term trade, if not longer, because also, I mean, we're kind of going tangential here, but there's the Uranus Pluto trine coming. And I really think AI is going to be back in it's going to be back in the front and center, the news and people's attention. And I think AI assets are going to get reignited because they've kind of been going through a downward trend at the moment, right? But and then that I think that might really associate with Uranus making its ingress into Gemini that's incoming. Great thoughts.
Fascinating.
Yep. Super good thoughts on Bill Gates. And, last but not least, Donald Trump.
Yeah, let's look at that because then I can actually pull that into the astro mapping that I'm looking at and we can wrap it up there.
Perfect.
Because this eclipse is hitting his chart so closely. It's really extraordinary. And just like we're seeing with the assets and other leaders, it's really interesting.
I totally agree with you. I mean, I think that one of the things that stands out to me about this eclipse is that it's quite literally hitting angular positions of so many assets. You just don't see that every day, so it really stands out as an important moment. But again, we've got the part of fortune being eclipsed, and interesting that we also had Bill Gates' part of fortune being eclipsed, right? So this very fascinating stuff. But this sitting on the descendant here, and what really stood out to me as I was preparing to make this video today is I caught a headline this morning that Putin is pitched Donald Trump with a bargain related to the dollar. And I guess if I just read the real quick intro paragraph to the article I was reading, it just says the Kremlin crafted an economic package designed to deepen its relations with the US as part of a potential agreement to end its war on the Ukraine. The high-level government memos seen by us suggest Russia is prepared to again embrace the dollar for trade, foregoing efforts to break away from the US financial system. Wow. And when I was just like, I read that and I was like, wow, that just screams this eclipse on Donald Trump's part of fortune, right? Which is on the descendant, partnerships, the seventh house. And what it says to me is there's something that we don't know, right?
Yeah.
This is what's being offered right now. I mean, I don't want to be negative. It would be amazing if we saw some peace deals come out of this, but it's all too often that these things start happening in the Mercury retrograde shadow period, around an eclipse. And it's just inevitable that we're going to see flip-flopping and volatility around it. But I thought that was very poignant and spoke to this eclipse that's taking place on his seventh, his descendant. Yeah.
Yeah, which is about partnerships. Also, the public at large, he's always had that part of fortune right there, which has made him famous pretty much his whole adult life. It's an astrology signature tied to that. Why don't you let me share some of my astro mapping? Because what you can look at when you look at Trump's chart is it's also opposite his rising sign. And there we go. Is it sharing the map now?
Yep.
In classical astrology, Ptolemy, for instance, thought that an eclipse opposite a leader's rising sign was one of the most challenging eclipses opposite because it was a pressure opposite the body. The rising sign can represent the body as well as the way you move through the world and your identity. And so something about his power is going to be eclipsed, and maybe something about the collective in that Aquarius energy or partners like this deal with Putin or this potential deal is amplified, and of course we don't know how that's going to play out. One of the reasons I like eclipse season, even though it can be eerie and uncomfortable, is it's such a natural phenomena. The literal lights in our solar system go out in some part of the world. And one thing we didn't talk about is this new moon is an eclipse and it's happening over Antarctica. The actual shadow is going to happen, which is a, you know, its own continent, but it's a continent that is owned by so many different parts of the world, and it's a pole, so you can see that that is going to have a global impact because of that. We often like to look to see where the eclipses land. And double check me there, by the way, in case
Yeah,
I
I
got
am
there.
pulling it up right now, and I
Yeah.
know that you're right because I actually posted about this. But absolutely, look here. Oh, you're screen sharing. I'll share at the end. But the path of totality is fully over Antarctica. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, that's
look
a
at
great
this.
observation.
You know, and I can't, you know, we're not in Antarctica here. This is United States. We have a US bias. You and I are based here. These lines represent the path of the planets over the angle. So this isn't the path of the eclipse, but how fascinating that the eclipse is crossing the angle of the ascendant, the rising sign, straight through the eastern seaboard of the US. That means this is going to be really significant for how the US is perceived, the identity, the way that it moves through the world. If you think of the US as, you know, an individual of sorts. And I mean, look at that. We have New York in the crosshairs there. That's just because the chart I pulled up there, that's not
Yeah.
astro mapping significant. But if we zoom in to DC, I mean, it's literally right over DC.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
and
Yep.
remember that because that new moon is square Uranus, it's going to bring that square into these lines as well.
Yep. That's
And,
incredible. That's,
right?
yep.
I don't mean to interrupt you there. Was there something you wanted to
No,
say
I was
on
just
that?
gonna say that I love visualizing it like this. For me, seeing the astrocartography of it all is very powerful.
It is. And look at Venus over here. You know, it's in the Atlantic. That astrocartography wise is not too far from the US. We do look at the lines that are closer. So the eclipse line is closer. But our dear friend Greenland, which we looked at last time on the new moon, is Uranus there, Pluto there,
Mm.
Saturn there. These are not easy lines. And I'm not saying that it's going to come back there, but it could be part of the news. What I wanted to focus on, though, is the fact that we have Pluto crossing the US in half through Chicago, Dallas, Houston, into Mexico. And it's crossing. So, this Pluto line, again, is the rising line. I don't know if that shows up on there. And the Uranus line is the IC line, the home, the foundation. And look at it going straight through Minnesota, where we've had a lot of political activity in the past months and, you know, multiple shootings by ICE, killings, you know, there, and they intersect. Uranus is volatile, unexpected. It can be violent, especially when it's connected with Pluto. But in a metaphorical sense, I see that line of Pluto literally cutting the US in half, saying, how are you going to evolve, US? How are you going to get through this
Mm.
division? How are you going to remove what's in the way of being a united country and rebuild? That to me, I just think this eclipse is going to be seen as really significant in the future.
I agree with you. That's really incredible. And I was just noticing, where's the exact point that those two things intersect? Is that in Arkansas?
Yeah, can you believe that?
That's really interesting. I wonder if we're going to see some news take place in around, like really very specifically around that. Oh, that was interesting to see the latitude lines too.
So yeah, I wonder too. So at a point where two longitude lines intersect has
Mhm.
a smaller orb of influence. They're called parens, but you can actually see how that latitude
Mhm.
line represents the intersection, and it goes
Yep.
all the way over Tennessee, North Carolina,
Yeah.
um, all the way over to the US, middle of California. You know, from mundane astrology perspective, this eclipse being square Uranus is definitely a concern for earthquakes and natural disasters. You know, not that you want to live in fear of that, but just taking note that we have Chiron close to the west coast here, and that is the IC line of Chiron. So again, the roots, the foundations, um, just something to take note. And then the latitude line again of Uranus and Pluto, they intersect again elsewhere, goes through Northern California.
Wow. Yeah, that is really incredible.
I don't,
This is an important eclipse.
super important.
And something we didn't mention that I always mention in new moon videos, just to remind anybody who is newer to astrology, is that the new moon This eclipse is powerful because eclipses can carry on for, up to 6 months or more. Sometimes the effects can be seen, but it's also setting the tone for the next lunar cycle as well, which is
Right.
just for the next month. And so that's where I expect that we'll see a lot of this very acute volatility in the financial markets, and probably, in mundane life as well, and in the news and whatnot. And just going to see how all of this plays out.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the ways that eclipses, as you know, of course, but can play out in the future for listeners is when the exact degree is hit by another planet. And
Correct.
so it's a 28-degree Aquarius eclipse, 28:49 minutes, some people rounding up to 29. The Mars Uranus square later in February is a hot spot of the month because that can be more volatility, more violence, and it's happening very close to this eclipse, I believe at 27 degrees. So not the exact same degree, but pretty close. It's another way we could see this eclipse play out in the news.
Well, Mars, I view Mars, and many astrologers view Mars as the activator. And so
Right.
specifically when Mars crosses over, that eclipse point is oftentimes when we see, whatever the big fireworks associated with the eclipse are going to be. We oftentimes
Yeah.
see that when Mars crosses over that point. And so
Yep.
it's interesting that that is going to be so soon, basically.
It's sure fascinating. It's something
So
else.
So buckle up, everybody. The next month is going to be action packed.
Yeah, it is. And you know what I wanted to say in concluding thoughts is when we looked at the last new moon, we saw that seventh house so heavily activated, and it was a month of significant selling in the metals. We saw a couple drawdown days in the equity markets. And I almost wonder, you tell me because you're more of an expert in this than me, but with the South Node there, as volatile as it could be, what if we end this cycle with less selling than we began it?
I wouldn't be surprised at all. And, I think it's entirely, well, look, I guess if I look at it, because of the equity markets, if we're just talking about the equity markets, are sideways right now. It's harder to predict the direction it's going to break
Of
based
course, yeah.
on pivots. But I use heliocentric astrology too, which is the astrology from the sun's perspective. And I have kind of created my own observation of an indicator that I've been using, which is the peak moment when we have the most amount of heliocentric aspects. And that's happening on the 16th. I mean, you
Incredible.
can't make it up, right? And so, and then there's a secondary one coming a little later in February, and I don't have the chart pulled up, but I think it's on the 23rd. And so that's, of course, on the heels of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction geocentrically, right? So I think that the next few weeks are going to be very volatile in the financial markets. And I think it's going to be hard to forecast up or down for the next couple of weeks. But
Of course, yeah.
I think if we were going to see a risk off move at all, I anticipate it to be between the two eclipses.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating time. Can you believe that peak heliocentric moment on President's Day on an eclipse that is challenging to leaders because it's in the sign of Aquarius opposite Leo?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
amazing. We're
Well,
living
thanks so
in
much.
amazing times.
Yes, it is. Thanks so much for having me again, Margot. This was fun to chat as always.
Yeah, this was really awesome. I really enjoy our chats. And so for the viewers, if you guys want to connect with KM or myself, there'll be links in the video description below. And make sure you hit the like and subscribe button because that helps my channel out. And we hope that you have a great month. And we'll see you back, hopefully, for a video about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Can't wait.
Bye.
Bye.